you put a credit freeze on a credit card, you call into the automated system and it says, what city were you born in? What's your spouse's maiden name? Whatever, what's the last 4 digits of your card, 4 digits of your social security number, all these elements of information. Well, they have those in that data record.
So they can unfreeze your credit.
Or if the credit card's been put on a fraud hold, like they can just take the fraud hold off and say, I've proven that I'm the owner of this card, remove the hold. And that data will never go away. Like, even though the groups that stole it go away, but like that data is out there forever. And your social security is not going to change. Your birthday's not going to change.
Well, it sounds like kind of like a nightmare. It sounds like there's nothing you can do.
Once it's gone, like it's gone.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. This month, there was a data breach at Anchorage Neighborhood Health Center where 60,000 patient records were hacked. Today on the show, we talk about that case specifically, but also Alaska's cybersecurity more generally. Our guest is Leon Jaimes, who is a cybersecurity consultant for healthcare organizations, state government, and financial institutions. We discuss his early life as well as his path to IT and to Alaska, but we also offer specific actions that Alaskans can take to make themselves more cybersecure. Leon Jaimes is the chair of the House District 20 Democrats and is the treasurer of the Anchorage Democrats.
Leon Jaimes, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Montana and Sealy Lake, a little bit northwest of Missoula.
What was your childhood like?
A lot of running around the woods and stuff like that. And it was a class of about 18 people for K
So it was
through 8.
small.
Yeah.
Did you go straight to college after high school?
No, never made it through high school. Parents split up when I was 13. We moved to California with my dad to Woodland, which is near Davis, Sacramento area. And then made it about halfway through 10th grade, got strung out, dropped out. And then at 16, my twin brother and I hitchhiked and rode freight trains out to Kansas. Kansas didn't work out, ended up in Denver, and then spent about the next 20 years in Denver.
Wow. So you and your twin brother headed out on your own at age 16?
Yeah, I was already on my own from about like 14 and a half. Like I was kind of couch surfing and functionally homeless.
What was that like?
I don't know. That was how it was. It was tough. It was a lot of fallout from the divorce, I think, and not having support resources to deal with that. And then, moving to a place where drugs were really taking hold quickly.
Do you have a relationship with your parents now?
Yeah, both.
Were they looking for you and your brother?
No, my dad was he was kind of a free range parent, I guess. They thought we were old enough to be independent, and he had left home really young also, around the same age, so it didn't seem abnormal to him.
So when you say strung out, like what were you strung out on?
Meth, yeah.
So you're using meth when you were 16?
14.
14.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
You and your twin brother?
No, he kind of stayed out of that. But, a lot of the kids in high school were doing either meth or coke.
What'd you do in Kansas?
We went out there to see if we could kind of start over and stay with my mom. And, we didn't tell her that we were coming. And she had already kind of started a new life, and that wasn't compatible with her new life. And so we turned around and headed the other way.
And you went to Denver?
We were trying to go to LA. We got dropped off in Denver, and it was the middle of a blizzard. And so we got hooked up with shelter there and some, resources and stayed.
How old are you now?
47.
47. So this is about 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, when is that? 95?
94. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And you made it work in Denver for 20 years. How did you make it work?
We had a lot of help, and we were lucky. And, the Urban Peak was the youth shelter that we got hooked up there. And so we had some great staff there, and they were going through it was interesting because it was kind of a different time in social services, and they had a lot of flexibility to do interesting things. And, it was success and relapse. And like my brother and I kind of did this thing where one of us would be doing good and the other one would be like relapsing. And then we would kind of flip flop and go through these things.
Is your identical twin?
No, fraternal.
Fraternal?
Yeah.
And did you just stay in the shelter, or did you end up with a family, or?
Stayed in the shelter, and then I got hooked up with some friends of the woman who was doing a law internship at Urban Peak. And so when my time at the shelter ran out, she asked them to let me stay with them, and I stayed with them for a while. And then my brother had gotten into like a transitional living program through Volunteers of America. And then, once we turned 18, it was easier to get housing for ourselves.
What did y'all do for money?
We worked a lot of like temp labor, and there was a program through the diversion program through the DA's office in the summer. And I worked doing urban forestry for them for a few years, and a lot of restaurant work. Like the restaurants didn't care who you were, and if you could wash dishes or chop vegetables, like you're good. Yeah.
So when did you start getting into IT? Did that happen in Colorado?
Yeah. So Planned Parenthood was doing sex education and, healthy choices groups at Urban Peak. So we met some people there. And then one of the other jobs that I ran across through that was being a youth counselor or youth, representative with the housing authority. And then I got a job at Planned Parenthood in the shipping department, and I would break my computer all the time. That was like right before the .com bubble burst. And so it was on its way up at the peak of like 2001, 2002. And so I really wanted to get into IT, and I'd always loved electronics. Like I was watching the help desk people come down, and I would install Real Player on my computer or something, and it would tank in a few days. And they would come down and put the CD in and reinstall the operating system and fix it. And I was like, I can do that. It looks like, you just click next, finish, and then it's good to go. So I ended up applying for a help desk position there when somebody left, and I got that. And a lot of that was just, due to my circumstances and knowing the people that I knew. So from there, I just kind of worked my way up in the department. They had local networks at each of the sites, and then they would back up their database onto a zip disk, and they would send it to the main office, where my job on the help desk was taking that zip disk and copying the files to the server. And so we could run reports about 30 to 45 days after the, visit was seen.
Were you there when they were making the transition towards a more traditional electronic medical record?
Yeah. And so we were, we went through the vendor selection process, and there was, I think, 3 candidates originally. We got it down to 2. The one that we really liked got bought by the other one. So we ended up going with the second choice, I think.
As someone who's worked in several different healthcare systems and used a variety of EMRs, I could say that they all have their own learning curve. You can learn how to use one electronic medical record very well, be very fluent in it. But then you go to a new job and it's new and you're starting all over. It's not always as intuitive as I think the folks who made them think it will be.
Yeah. It's really incredible because earlier this year, somebody was talking to me about an EMR system that's really widely used, and that, it's been acquired from other companies and things like that, but it's been around for like 20 years and it still sucks.
Yeah.
There's all this functionality, and it does a lot of things, and a lot of things it doesn't do well. Like, to me, that's just a huge racket. It really bothers me. And it's by design, like that's a profitability thing, and it's tough. Change Healthcare was the big breach that was back in like February. And that one affected TRICARE and a bunch of the other insurance providers. What was amazing was that so many people did not know that they were customers of Change Healthcare. And it was set up as, all these different processors of many different servers, like prescription validation, insurance validation, like claims processing, all these different things that had been bought up by Change Healthcare, who then got bought up by United Healthcare. And so somewhere in the line, like there was almost 100% chance that your record was being processed by them. And, that happened. That was a great case that highlights one of the issues with HIPAA is the 60-day notification rule. you don't have to notify if you're still investigating. And they investigated for like 3 months or more. And, even though everybody knew, like,
So I want to talk about breaches. I want to talk about the fact that I've gotten letters in the mail saying that my healthcare data may have been breached, and I literally throw it away as if it was junk mail because I don't want to be inconvenienced to do anything. And I'm like, well, they're probably not going to steal 1 million people's identities simultaneously, so maybe I'll get lucky. My identity won't be stolen, and I just go about my business. But let's go back to you in Denver. You're working for Planned Parenthood. How did you end up in Alaska?
So I went from Planned Parenthood after, I think, like 15 years. I got my first network certification, the Cisco CCNA, and I got a contract to hire with Chipotle. I went there, worked there for a little under 2 years, I think. Got exposure to a much bigger network.
So you were like IT for Chipotle?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Like, I wouldn't think they would need IT.
Oh, yeah. So Planned Parenthood had 34 clinics, and Chipotle had, I think when I got hired, they were around 1,100 stores. And so we had to connect them all. And then, they have the database that processes all of that. And they were rolling out the mobile app so that he could order from your phone and stuff like that. They were really innovative in their IT stack, and it was very agile because, they had just become a publicly traded company. It was funny because one time the developers, they were using like a test license key from Google's Maps API, and the mobile app went live using that test API, and there wasn't a lot of people using it. So they were under the limit of how many queries you could do for your location. And somebody realized that you could just go in and like iterate through zip codes, and you could just hit whatever the interface was to find the location with every possible combination of 5-digit numbers. And so they had that on a script, and they started hitting it, and it was just going crazy, and it took down the app because the Google API key like hit the threshold really quick.
Leon, I have to say, I didn't understand most of the words that you said.
Yeah.
I don't know what an API is.
Application Programming Interface. And so, it's like on a web server or another system. And so you can make a call to it and it'll do something. And
so basically somebody did that, like wanted to bring down the system just to be like a nuisance. What was what's the goal?
So. Yeah. I think just to be a nuisance, or maybe to make a point that like somebody hadn't coded it properly. Like, you shouldn't be able to query 900 zip codes in a second. Like somebody ordering a burrito is not going to do that. But the developers in the location thing, if there wasn't a Chipotle near you, they put a message that said, there's no Chipotle near you, maybe you should move. And so when the API went down, nobody was near a Chipotle. And people were like, calling the Fifth Avenue store in New York and saying, like, I'm standing in front of the store and it's giving me this message that there's no Chipotle near me. Maybe I should move. Like, it was kind of funny, but there was some fallout from that because people were like pretty pissed about it.
And I'll say that I love Chipotle. And whenever I travel outside of Alaska, I usually eat at a Chipotle at least once. Do you have any insight into why we don't have Chipotle in Alaska?
Yeah, they have to have a profitable model, and then they also have to be close to the source of their food. And so we just don't have the ability to get the fresh foods that they need.
So how did you end up in Alaska?
Chipotle was great, and except for it was really intense, and I didn't have good boundaries with myself, and I was drinking a lot. And
oh yes, we didn't talk about that. So you had used crystal meth as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
You got, I assume you stopped using crystal.
Yeah. I smoked weed and then I drank a lot. And like looking back, I definitely had a problem. It did not occur to me at the time. And like people like very bluntly hinted that maybe I should seek some help about that. And like, I was just, it was over my head.
But you were functional. You were showing up for your IT jobs and paying for your rent. And
Yeah. And then I just kind of burned out because we were working a lot of hours and I just couldn't handle it. And I took a job with a company up in Aspen, had an IT shop up there. And I was thinking that I was going to get to snowboard a lot. And that was my gig. So I went up there for a season and I was living outside Snowmass, and that just didn't really click with me. I didn't know anybody. So it was like really lonely. And then I was also 10 miles outside of Aspen. So like I could ride the bus into town, but there's nothing to do. My idea of like how to find something to do was go to the bar, and that didn't work so well. So I was starting to like get my application out and my resume beefed up for that because I knew I didn't want to stay there. I still had my house in Denver, and I had just gotten into kind of looking at stocks, and I set up a filter that would show me companies that were coming off their 52-week low. And right at the top of that list was ALK, Alaska Communications. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I read about what the CEO was doing with the company. He was new, and he was very focused on like building their market with their existing customers and customer service. And I was like, great, I'm in. Alaska Communications, I wonder if they have any jobs open. And I looked at the snow report, and Alyeska had gotten like 11 feet that year. And I was like, maybe Alaska's the place. So I applied for a network administrator position. And that was, I want to say around January or so.
What year?
2013. And they flew me up for a second interview during Ferrandi weekend. And I was like, wow, this place is really cool. And yeah, I didn't want to be in Aspen. And I was like, all right, yeah, like I don't have anything holding me back. And I packed my snowboard and my fat bike and one suitcase. It was 2013.
You were still single then?
Yeah. I didn't have time for a relationship. And Planned Parenthood, like they did a really good job of like teaching me how to prevent unplanned pregnancies. But like, I kind of missed the part where it was like, at some point you're going to get to a place where maybe you want to have a family. And like that part, it just never hit me. I was like, I'm going to party a lot and be single.
Did you stop drinking or just got control of your drinking?
No, I stopped. It was in I think it was 2014. It was about a year after I got up here. I got to a point where I just, realized that I didn't have any control over my drinking. And, even as well as I planned things out, like I would put my sleeping bag in my car, and, that way if I went to Girdwood or something, I'd have a place to sleep. Like I could, sleep in, my bivy sack in the sleeping bag. And then, at this one time, it just didn't work out. And, I ended up in somebody's house that I didn't know and got charged with trespassing and kicked off of the job that I was working on with the state. And so I was, at that point, I was like, oh, maybe I should go to a meeting.
Because you had some familiarity with the program from having grown up in the shelter and...
Yeah, I knew a few people that were in the program, and I had never been able to imagine myself not drinking. It was always like, yeah, but like, what do you do when you go visit somebody and hang out on the porch? Like,
right.
Drink beers? And it was really foreign to me. So luckily I had some people that had gone through it before me, and I knew what it kind of looked like, and I knew where to go when I was ready. And yeah. So.
What's been your experience in general of IT in Alaska in the past decade?
I've worked for companies, consulting for places in Alaska and outside of Alaska. And I don't think there's all that much difference. Like they all face the same challenges. I think the biggest difference was that some of the rural places in Alaska, like they used to have this sort of inadvertent barrier of protection because their connection was so slow. And that's gone now.
So ironically, by rural Alaska being much more well-connected, they're much more vulnerable to cyber attacks.
Yeah. And security appliances are the highest cost per gigabit of throughput. So you get a faster connection, you can do more, but you also increase exponentially the cost of protecting that connection. And I think that across the board, like rural healthcare, like I've worked with hospitals in some very rural places in the United States. And then I also used to do like threat research. There's public databases that scan the internet, and you can go look for vulnerabilities or services that might have vulnerabilities. And the rural hospitals, like they just don't have the resources, not even close. And it comes down to a decision, like, do we try and keep the doctors we have, or do we make things like, more secure? And the security is never the choice.
Right. Well, I think I shared earlier, just, in terms of my own personal habits when it comes to cybersecurity, I just don't want to think about it. Like, I don't want to spend money on something that may not happen. And and also, like, I just feel like everything's a scam. I have McAfee on my home computer. I feel like every time I turn around, it's like sending me a message to add some new service.
Yeah.
And I don't know, do I need this new service or do I not? I sometimes don't even know if I have McAfee or if it's expired. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I just want my computer to work fast.
Yeah. I think for the most part, the built-in, like Windows Defender does a really good job now. It didn't always used to be that way, but now like the security that Microsoft has built in is really good, and you don't
Need a
really
second
need
service.
a second service. On the enterprise level, you do, but it's also really challenging because Microsoft has free tools, and when it comes to securing an enterprise network, like you can do so much with the free things that Microsoft gives you, but nobody does, and it's more work, and a lot of people just don't know how to do it. And then when it comes to truly securing a network, the administrative overhead of that it's really difficult, and it just doesn't balance with like the business needs.
I know you because you're my constituent.
Yeah.
I know you because you're the chair of House District 20 Democrats. And I know your wife because I see her at the gym.
Yeah.
I know your 2 kids. I guess, how did you go from being single and spending the night in your car in Girdwood to becoming the family man that I know in my neighborhood?
Well, we met on OkCupid, and we went on a couple hiking dates, and it was just like, wow, like this algorithm is like really good. And we hit it off right away. And on her profile pic, she had a picture of Berthoud Pass in Colorado. And so it turns out like we lived like 7 blocks from each other around the same time in Denver. And Berthoud Pass, where her profile picture was from, was the first place that my brother and I ever went hiking in Colorado. And it's very dear to my heart. But yeah, I had been sober for, I think, a little bit over a year. And I had started to realize like what I actually wanted out of my life. Part of it was starting a family, and that was something that she also wanted. And, we enjoyed all kinds of other things, like the compatibility was just super high. So
That's so interesting that you frame it in terms of the algorithm and, it found like compatibility.
I mean, I tried like to find dates, but I'm a really shy person, and like the thought of like going up to somebody and like asking for a date like was something that terrified me my entire life, and that was probably part of why I was single in the first place. But it felt really great.
You've texted me over the years about cyber concerns. And I'm concerned about cyber stuff, but like I said earlier, it's just a foreign world for me. And I kind of just ignore it and hope that nothing bad happens. But on September 5th, Will Courtney at Alaska's News Source did a story on the hacking and leaking 10,000 Anchorage Health Center patient records.
Yeah.
And then on the 15th, they updated it. And so Will Courtney's reporting said the FBI was aware of the Anchorage Health Clinic data breach of 60,000 patients impacted. My husband is a patient there. I assume he's one of the 60,000. Again, I want to ignore things that are bad, that I don't really know how to control. But as I read the reporting, which I hadn't done at the time, there were people being contacted by the hackers, just letting them know that, hey, we have your social security number, here it is, telling them personal information. So it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it is. One of the big things that I don't think a lot of people realize is that they'll take a sample of the data and they'll publish it on a public site. And there's security researchers and journalists who keep an eye on those. And so some of those contacts will come, not necessarily in this breach, but in other ones that I've worked on. They'll come from a journalist, and they'll be reaching out to people, and they'll say like, hey, did you know your information was compromised? And sometimes that's how it becomes public, or the news will write a story about it before the organization ever goes public with it. And it'll take pulling teeth to get them to say, yeah, I've worked on some ransomware attacks that were similar. And there was one by the Conti ransomware group. So I found the site, where they publish these breaches, and there was hundreds and hundreds of organizations, and
that had been breached.
Nobody, like, it just didn't get picked up. There was other stuff that was
more newsworthy at the time.
And like some of the organizations would just lie about it, right? I looked at one database dump, and it was from a hospital, and there was about 27,000 patients in there. And their stance on it was that they weren't sure if any information had been accessed. They were still investigating. And this was like 6 months later. This was a hospital in mid-America, and they had definitely been compromised. And this was supposed to be like the 10% that the hackers had chosen to release as like evidence that they had gotten access to the systems. And there's some key phrases that the attorneys will use. And one is like, we don't know what they've accessed, we're still investigating. Or there's no evidence that they accessed any sensitive information. And when I hear that, what my experience has shown me is that that means that that organization did not have security controls and audit logs to be able to determine where the attackers actually went. And so they have no idea what they accessed. They probably accessed everything.
So that's interesting. And thinking about like how they'll publish like 10% or a small percentage to show evidence that they have all this data, that kind of corresponds with the reporting from September 5th versus September 15th. It's not that these hackers went in and got an additional 50,000 records. They had the 60,000 records to begin with. It's just that they made it known that they had the 10,000 records.
Yeah. And the thing is like, if they had access to the database, like they downloaded the entire database. So whoever came up with 60,000, like maybe the hackers are saying 60,000, but it's everything. And it's probably more than just that patient database, whatever that may be. Like the ransomware attacks that I've worked on, they took all of the files, like they took everything off the file server. And so a lot of that, you're like, what's sensitive on the file server? Well, if you hire somebody and they send you their driver's license, or if you have employees who you need their family's information so that you can set up the insurance, like all that HR data is there too. And then if there's any ongoing litigation, like that's another high value target.
What's the biggest worry? I mean, is it identity theft? And what is identity theft?
So identity theft is where, they get enough information to, set up fraudulent accounts in your name or, represent themselves as you. And just like with public companies or legal companies that do data aggregation, they're also doing data aggregation. And so they've got their own marketplace where they'll say, we've got this data set, and they'll sell it to somebody who aggregates that with other data sets. And there were some tests that were done back with, I forget what the breach was, but basically, once you have enough of the data, all of the questions that you get asked if you want to set up a new account, they'll have. And some of it was you put a credit freeze on a credit card, you call into the automated system, and it says, what city were you born in? What's your spouse's maiden name? Whatever, what's the last 4 digits of your card? 4 digits of your social security number, all these elements of information. Well, they have those in that data record.
So they can unfreeze your credit.
Yeah.
And do a car loan, open another credit card, do whatever.
Or if the credit card's been put on a fraud hold, like they can just take the fraud hold off and say, I've proven that I'm the owner of this card, remove the hold. And that data will never go away. Like, even though the groups that stole it go away, or they change their name, like, we have the free credit monitoring that people get for 6 months or a year, but like that data's out there forever, and your social security is not going to change. Your birthday's not going to change.
Well, that sounds like kind of like a nightmare. It sounds like there's nothing you can do.
Once it's gone, like it's gone. And I think it's absurd that companies pay the ransom and that they continue to, because...
And I guess like that's another thing that, again, it might be being reported on, but I'm not reading that far into the article. So companies are paying ransoms.
Yeah.
All the time.
All the time.
And how much are these ransoms?
I think the one with Change Healthcare was like the largest ever recorded. And that was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 million, I think.
And they pay the ransom, and what's the agreement? That we're going to give you the data back, or?
That they're going to destroy the data. And so the criminal who stole your data in the first place, who's anonymous...
For $2 million, I'll destroy all that data.
Yeah. And they don't have to do anything. There's no recourse if they don't adhere to that agreement, other than the only thing that I've heard is that they have a reputation to protect. But like Conti's gone. They were up for about 2 years. The data they stole, like Conti doesn't exist anymore. So like, who cares? And what's somebody going to do if they now release that data?
So how do you try to be a good steward of you and your family's personal data?
I text my representative. And I think that's one of the more important ones. But I think also that putting a freeze on your credit through Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, and just keep the credit frozen until you need it. And if you're...
So you keep your credit frozen all the time?
All the time, yeah.
And how long have you been doing that for?
Since like late 2000s, I think. Brian Krebs had an article about it, and he recommended that a long time ago. And so I started doing that. And then, anytime I need to open a new line of credit, it's kind of, like you have to go through the steps, and they've changed it a little bit too. So they really have made it not as accessible as it used to be. It used to be really simple. And
you
would
freeze and unfreeze.
Yeah, you get a PIN, and that was your PIN. And you could call and freeze and unfreeze. And they've driven it to more of an online model. But yeah, that's that, and keeping up to date with security patches. I also have to say that like I'm very cynical about it, because I think that with HIPAA, I think HIPAA is a lost cause, because as a provider, if you look at the data that social media companies have and telco providers have with your phone, the telemetry on that shows your movements around different areas and what time you moved somewhere is very detailed. And if you say show me the last 5 years of movement for a patient, you could probably infer some things that are medically significant. And we don't protect that data at all. We just give it away. And we talk about our medical stuff in supposedly private messaging over Gmail. And, a lot of those companies, they own that data now, and they definitely mine it.
When you say that Gmail owns the data, what does Gmail own?
I think at this point, anything that's in your cloud storage,
So if I have 100,000 emails stored in my cloud storage,
yeah,
they own what's in the emails?
The terms of service are really complicated. It's kind of like with HIPAA, you can deobfuscate the data and then use the deobfuscated data for reporting. And so their terms of service are similar to that. And then AT&T, I think it was somewhere in the mid 2000s, there was a big privacy uproar about it, because they changed their terms of service to say that anything that transits their network is theirs. And
so any text message that you send belongs to AT&T.
Yeah, or phone call.
And then do you have any feelings about using Signal or WhatsApp?
Yeah, Signal is great. If you need end-to-end security, that's the one. But you also have to have good operational security around it, because if somebody gets your phone, they have access to your Signal messages. And that's what we saw with the January 6th prosecutions, was that if somebody in that group chat, they receive the message, they can share it or they can screenshot it and things like that. But as far as protecting it from interception, it's a private key that's on your phone and on the other end that's protecting it. And there's no way for anybody in between to decrypt that message. WhatsApp, I think their encryption is pretty good, but I kind of
owned by Facebook.
Yeah, I don't necessarily trust Facebook that much. And then I think that's one that's been used for exploiting the client software by sending malicious links to people as well.
I get a lot of text messages from unknown numbers.
Yeah.
Pretty much, I would say daily. A typical text message would be are we still going to meet up, from an unknown number? I report it as spam, but so many. Is everybody getting those?
I mean, I don't think I get them daily, but if your number's out there somewhere, then yes. And that's a growing industry. And those scams are operated by organizations that are very organized. And so they're doing analysis on who their audience is as well, and depending on what they're trying to sell you or get you into can vary. Because I get, AT&T, I just paid off my phone, and AT&T sent me an offer to buy the new phone. And very coincidentally, I start getting spam messages with scammers trying to sell me a phone also. And it seems to me like there's been an increase in those recently. And yeah.
So I'm looking at the frequently asked questions that's currently on the Anchorage Neighborhood Health Center website about this breach.
Yeah.
And they have, how do I place a fraud alert on my credit file? How do I place a security freeze on my account? And, it has the contact information for TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. So you have to freeze your credit on all three of those services.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are those services and why do we have to do it on all three?
So those are the credit reporting services. And so they keep track of your credit score. And then anytime anybody wants to open a new line of credit, they check with them to see what your credit rating is. And if you freeze your credit, that check can occur. And whoever the lending organization is won't approve it. So that's why the freeze is there. Sometimes they only check with one of them. And so they might only check with Experian. And so if you have frozen the other two, but you didn't freeze Experian, then they could authorize a line of credit that way.
I'm tempted to ask you some other questions about good cybersecurity, but I have been using some of the same passwords since I was 21 years old, and I'm 50.
Yeah.
And when it suggests use a strong password, I don't know. I mean, I don't understand how any of these systems work. And people have told me about getting an app that would save these crazy passwords. But then do you use that stuff? What do you do with what's your password hygiene?
Yeah, I use Bitwarden. I used LastPass, but then they got breached. And so then I had to go and change all the passwords. And yeah, I have maybe 2 or 3 passwords that I actually remember. And one is to unlock my computer and the other one is to unlock the password database. And aside from that, everything is randomly generated. And, if I need to reset something, I go through the reset process. But I use Bitwarden. It's on my phone and then it's on the computer. It has a browser plugin. Most of the time it autofills stuff.
And does your wife have her own Bitwarden?
Yeah, she has Bitwarden, and then we have a shared, the family folder or whatever, where we keep passwords to share with each other.
Again, and you've probably been doing this for a long time. My fears are probably unfounded.
No.
But I just feel I have so much frustration in my life about not knowing what my password is, about having to reset my passwords again.
It gets easier. Once you start doing it, it gets easier. But the initial conversion, especially when I did it, it was, I don't know, 10 years ago. And so back then, I didn't have as many things. And now I've got thousands.
I guess I've been lucky because I've made it 30 years, my entire adult life, without ever using a randomly generated password.
Yeah. There's a site that I think it's Troy Hunt runs called IHaveBeenPwned.com. And you can type in your email address and it'll tell you if that email was in a data breach and what data breach it was. And for anybody who's been around a while, their email has probably been in a data breach. And so going back to that data aggregation, so somebody breaches some site that has your username and password, they can either sell that information or they can go buy the data set. And then they have all the other sites that you use your email on. So even if your password didn't get compromised in site A, if they got it from site B, now they can use it on site A.
So I think there was a 60 Minutes a few years ago about people whose identities have been stolen. And even after they've done everything possible to try to undo the identity stealing, their lives are still kind of destroyed. They're never able to have credit again. They're never able to undo what the criminal did to them. They're a victim forever. What's the simple steps towards moving towards Bitwarden or whatever? If I were going to I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to download this app and I'm going to change all the passwords on everything I use.
Yeah.
How does one start that? How much time should someone allow? How do I do it?
It doesn't have to be a big chore. And so start by downloading the app and installing it. And then, you can think about like if there's new sites that you're adding, you can use it for a new site. And then if there's things that are like super important that you want
Like
to
my bank
access
accounts.
yeah. And I don't know, maybe the bank account isn't, if the bank account is using multi-factor authentication,
Maybe
which-
leave it.
yeah, because like with Google and a lot of like the larger enterprises that can afford it, they're going to be tracking like, your what browser and computer you're logging in with and where you're logging in from. And if they notice a change, they're going to prompt you for another factor of authentication. And so that's really good. And so those might be like less worrisome than a site that doesn't have that and only uses a password for authentication.
That's actually good information.
Yeah.
So my bank accounts, my Gmail, those sorts of things are all two-factor authentication.
Yeah.
So really, I would want to start using these stronger passwords on new things that I'm joining. And I don't know, perhaps some of the other apps that I use pretty regularly that just have a saved password in there, but it's a crappy password.
Yeah. And I would say target the ones that are those second factors also. So if the second factor is a text message to you or an email to you, make sure that the account on that phone provider is using a strong password, and make sure that the account on the email is using multi-factor and a strong password.
Got it. What sorts of things do you think would be the types of legislation that we should be working on in Alaska to make Alaska more cyber secure?
I think, Alaska has some really good privacy laws already, but I don't think they get enforced. And so part of that is like, making sure that the AG is doing their job and going after privacy violations. And then we have to move away from it being legal to pay ransom. We don't pay ransoms for other type of situations, and we shouldn't be doing it in this situation either, because those payments will fund the next 15, 20 attacks. And if there's no money in it, they're going to stop doing it. But there's tons of money in it.
So that seems like a pretty simple bill. Like we just make it illegal to pay cyber ransom.
Mm-hmm. There's states that have enacted legislation like California, and I want to say like maybe Massachusetts, like they have privacy laws that apply to any of their citizens wherever they are. And Alaska could do the same thing. And it applies to companies who are doing business in California. Like you're subject to those laws. And I think there's a lot of current legislation out there that can be mirrored for Alaska. And then, the other thing is I think there just needs to be more accountability, because right now, like we don't know how bad the breach was, and the FBI is not going to tell us, and the organization's not going to tell us. And, the patients, they're never going to know. And I think that that's something where I don't know how that would work.
But having like some sort of like transparency law,
Yeah.
I could see how that would be difficult to enforce, but it might be good to have it there.
But you can audit, and we have, like CGIS is a good example. That's the Criminal Justice Information System.
But Leon, this is like one of those questions where I feel like it's, you talked earlier about how once the data is out there, 60,000 people's social security numbers, the criminals have access to them.
Yeah.
That even if the ransom is paid, the criminals say they're going to destroy them, the chances are that they're not destroyed and they're kind of out there forever, and you're not going to get a new social security number. It's like your social security number is public. Is knowing that helpful if there's nothing you can do about it?
Yes. I think it's helpful to know that you've been in a breach. And especially if it's right after the breach. I think that time frame between like the criminals getting your data and them starting to use it is pretty short. And so a lot of the activity happens in that time. And so I think it's important to let people know. And I think that is tricky because, yeah, there's an ongoing investigation and you don't want to, like say how bad it was, and like nobody does. But the other thing I'd say is that like all of the attacks that I've worked response on, a common refrain is that there is a sophisticated nation state actor or like a sophisticated threat actor. And The technicality of that is that was never the case. It was always some vulnerability that it was like 10 years old. And why hadn't that gotten patched? And then you're supposed to have audit logs. Like, why didn't you have audit logs? And why weren't you doing like the bare minimum cybersecurity? And the reason is because it's not profitable and it doesn't make business sense to do that. And so when you, as a business owner or leadership in the organization, you're evaluating the risk and you say, do we spend all this money to secure our systems or do we just take the risk? The answer is always take the risk. And it's getting a little bit better, but the attacks are getting a lot better. And more is moving to the cloud.
And the cloud is at risk.
Yeah, I mean, there's always vulnerabilities. And the thing that ransomware, I think, really obscures is the fact that before ransomware, there was hacking and there were cyber attacks. But they weren't things that were like public impacting and they weren't as visible. And those haven't gone away. Like we have Salt Typhoon, I think it was Chinese threat actors, and they infiltrated the telecoms and they were getting into the routers and network gear. And they're very silent, very stealthy. You don't know that you've been breached. And they're making a concerted effort to not be detected. And the breadth of that is, I think, is really concerning. And their approach is more about like getting access to information and using it for themselves. They're not trying to extort anything off of it. They're building their database. And I don't think China is like alone in that. I'm sure there's other nation states that are doing it as well. And that's a national security threat. And when everybody's focused on protecting against ransomware, like the threats from that get overlooked and the security controls that mitigate that and the security controls that would detect a breach, those get missed. And that's really concerning, I think. I mean, yeah.
Do you have a book to recommend?
Book to recommend. I would say Rolling Nowhere by Ted Conover.
What's that book about?
He just hopped freight trains across the country back in maybe the 80s or 90s and just he took a couple courses, I think, at Metro in Denver and then decided that he was going to go see the country by freight. And this was, before 9/11. It locked down a lot more since then. But yeah, he's really a character.
So what's it called again?
Rolling Nowhere.
Rolling Nowhere.
Yeah, Ted Conover.
Leon Jaimes, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you. And I also wanted to say thank you so much for your service. And I think that your work as a representative is amazing. And I also wanted to acknowledge like the sacrifice that your family makes.
Thank you.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@aklight.gov or call 907-269-0123.